Unexpected orders. The hallway was cold and silent. Only the soft hum of the ship's engines filled the air. Ethan Grant, a human engineer, walked with heavy steps, his bag hanging from his shoulder. He had spent years working on human ships, repairing engines, fixing power lines, and solving problems no one else could. But this time, things were different. Ethan stopped in front of room 7C, his new room. A small metal plate showed his name and another name, one he could not even pronounce correctly. Karish Vorak. Ethan frowned. His orders were clear. Share a room with an alien engineer from the Vassarine Empire, a species humans had only worked with for 5 years. They were not friends. They were not enemies either. But they did not trust each other. Ethan sighed, pressed the door button, and stepped inside. The room was small, too small for 2 people. There was only one bed pushed against the wall, one desk, and a small storage locker. The air smelled of metal and machine oil. Sitting on the lower half of the bed was Karish. Karish was tall, almost touching the low ceiling. His silver skin glowed faintly under the room's dim light. He had 4 arms, each resting calmly on his knees. His yellow eyes stared at Ethan without blinking. His face had no mouth, only small breathing slits on the side of his neck. To humans, Vassarine always looked like statues. Cold, quiet, impossible to read. Ethan cleared his throat. Guess we're roommates. Karish gave no reply. He just nodded once, slow and careful. Ethan tossed his bag on the desk and looked at the single bed again. So, how's this gonna work? You sleep half, I sleep half. Or, you don't sleep. Karish's voice came, soft but metallic, like 2 wires touching. We adapt. Ethan rubbed his face. This was going to be a long mission. They didn't have time to argue. Minutes after Ethan arrived, a red alert flashed across the small screen on the wall. System failure in Section D12, the main power grid. Both engineers were ordered to report immediately. Ethan grabbed his tool belt. Karish already had his gear. Strange glowing tools Ethan had never seen before. They left the room, walking side by side, saying nothing. The ship was old, a human Vassarine hybrid model, built after the First Alliance Treaty. Half the systems were human tech, the other half alien. No one fully understood how it all worked together. Ethan and Karish were expected to figure it out. When they reached D12, the door was stuck. Ethan pulled out his multi-tool and forced it open. The hallway inside was dark, filled with the smell of something burning. Karish held up a small scanning device. Strange symbols appeared on its screen. Not human language, not Vassarine either. Ethan leaned closer. What's that? Karish's breathing slits widened. Unknown. The lights flickered, then died completely. Only Karish's silver glow and Ethan's flashlight cut through the dark. They found the power console. It was covered in black slime, a thin, oily substance that moved slightly under the light. Ethan reached out, but Karish grabbed his wrist with surprising speed. Do not touch. Ethan pulled back. What is it? Karish's voice was lower now. Not part of the ship. The floor trembled slightly beneath their feet, like something moving deep inside the walls. Ethan and Karish exchanged a glance, a human and an alien, both confused, both afraid. Let's clean this up, Ethan said, trying to sound confident. They worked in silence, human hands and alien hands moving together, cutting wires, replacing panels, rerouting power. The slime burned away under high heat, but the smell stayed, something between rotting metal and wet earth. After an hour, the lights came back. The power system was stable, but neither engineer felt any better. First day, Ethan said with a forced smile. Good start. Karish didn't respond. Back in their room, the silence was heavy. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Karish stood near the door, perfectly still, like a statue again. We should set some rules, Ethan said. Karish tilted his head slightly. Rules. Yeah. Like, you don't touch my stuff. I won't touch yours. And if you snore, I'm throwing a pillow at you. Karish blinked his glowing eyes slowly. I do not snore. Ethan laughed once, tired. Great. He lay back, his boots still on. The bed was too small for one, impossible for two. Karish didn't move from the door. Somewhere in the walls, something clicked. A faint sound, like metal fingers tapping. Ethan sat up, but the noise was gone. Did you hear that? Ethan asked. Karish's breathing slits flared slightly. Yes. Neither of them said more. Two engineers, human and alien, forced to share a room, a bed, and maybe a secret neither species understood yet. In the silence, the ship itself seemed to breathe. First night, first threat. The small room felt even smaller after the lights went out for the night shift. On human ships, lights dimmed after 2,200 hours to save energy. The gentle hum of the ship's core systems was the only sound left, except for the quiet, rhythmic breathing of Karish, standing at the far side of the room. Ethan lay flat on the single narrow bed, his boots hanging off the edge, his arms crossed behind his head. There was barely space for him alone, but Karish, nearly 7 feet tall, still hadn't even tried to sit on the bed. You gonna stand there all night? Ethan muttered. Karish didn't answer right away. His yellow eyes were locked on the ceiling, as if he could see through the metal panels to something above them. My species can sleep standing, Karish said softly. It is efficient. Ethan snorted. Must be nice. The silence returned, heavy like a blanket, pressing down on both of them. Ethan could feel his own heartbeat in his ears, and the faint smell of burned circuits still clung to his clothes from earlier. As his mind drifted towards sleep, something shifted, a soft creak, like stressed metal bending under pressure. Ethan's eyes flicked open. It was coming from the floor. He sat up slowly, the thin mattress creaking beneath him. The noise was faint, almost like something crawling, brushing lightly against the metal floor beneath the bed. Ethan swung his legs over the side, his bare feet meeting cold metal. Karish turned his head slightly. You hear it too. It wasn't a question. Ethan grabbed his flashlight from the desk and leaned down, pulling up the thin storage drawer under the bed. The space was empty, except for a thin layer of gray dust, but the noise was gone. Ship's old, Ethan said, more to himself than Karish. Probably settling. Karish did not reply. The Vasarine engineer's 4 hands remained still, 2 at his sides, 2 crossed over his chest. His species had evolved in low-gravity environments, where sound traveled differently. Vasarine didn't just hear, they felt vibrations through the bones in their arms. And what Karish felt now was not natural. Without warning, the room lights flickered, once, twice, then stayed on, far brighter than usual. Ethan winced, shading his eyes. Karish's head tilted sharply, his eyes narrowing. The system was stable when we left, Ethan muttered. You saw it. Karish stepped forward, one long finger tracing along the edge of the wall panel. This is not error. Before Ethan could ask what that meant, the room's door slammed shut on its own. What the hell? Ethan jumped up, crossing the room in 2 steps. He slapped the manual override, but the door didn't budge. The green unlocked light had turned a faint, flickering red. Karish was already at the small wall terminal, his fingers moving too fast for Ethan to follow. Strange Vasarine symbols appeared on the screen, mixed with human letters and numbers. It was a mess. Overlapping code, incomplete commands, something trying to rewrite itself. This is not human code, Karish said. It's not Vasarine either, Ethan added. His own hands tapped the screen beside Karish, trying to override the lock, but the system refused to respond. It was like something else was in control. The lights dimmed again. The air in the room grew slightly colder, though the environmental controls showed normal temperature. We're not alone, are we? Ethan said quietly. Karish's breathing slits flared open wider, a Vasarine reaction to stress. "We are not." The ship shuddered beneath their feet, a long, slow vibration that traveled through the floor and up into their bones. Ethan had served on old ships before. Hull flex, engine rattle, even micro-meteor impacts. But this wasn't like any of those. This felt alive. Suddenly, the room's terminal screen cleared, replaced by a single line of text, written in perfect English and Vasarine script, side by side. "We are watching." Ethan stepped back, skin prickling with cold sweat. "That's not funny. I did not write it," Karish said calmly, though his upper hands had curled into tight fists. The floor under the bed made the sound again, a soft dragging noise, like something smooth and wet sliding across metal. Ethan aimed his flashlight under the bed again. This time, something was there. A thin line of black slime ran along the base of the wall, oozing slightly, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. It moved, not fast, but with clear purpose, sliding along the edge where floor met wall. Ethan jerked back. "That's the same stuff from the power grid." Karish knelt beside him, his silver fingers tracing the edge of the slime without touching it. "It is aware." Ethan stared at him. "What does that even mean?" Karish's yellow eyes turned toward him. "It knows we see it." The lights flashed again, and this time, they didn't come back. Total darkness filled the room. Ethan's breathing quickened, but Karish stood perfectly still, his species adapted to low-light environments. Ethan could feel the alien's presence beside him, tall and unmoving, but somehow comfortingly solid in the dark. Then, a sound. Not from the floor this time. It came from inside the wall itself, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers gently drumming on metal. Ethan whispered, "That's coming from the other side of the wall." Karish's voice was even softer. "There is no room on the other side." They stood together in silence, two engineers, one human, one alien, listening to something inside the ship, tapping on the thin metal between them. It wasn't just a malfunction, or a glitch. It was a message. The screen flickered back to life, and for just 1 second, a single word appeared in bright red text before the screen went black again. "Hello." Neither of them spoke. In the silence, the ship seemed to breathe again. Forced cooperation. The door finally opened after nearly 20 minutes of complete silence. Neither Ethan nor Karish knew if it was because of their commands, or if something else decided to let them out. Ethan stepped into the hallway first, flashlight still in his hand. The corridor lights flickered above, struggling to stay on. Karish followed, his four hands relaxed, but his yellow eyes constantly scanning the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. "This isn't a normal system failure," Ethan muttered. "No," Karish agreed. "This ship is changing." Changing into what? Karish didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he didn't want to say. They walked side by side down the corridor, passing empty rooms and silent doors. A thin layer of black slime stretched along some of the walls, spreading slowly like spilled oil. It moved in pulses, almost like it was breathing with the ship itself. Ethan tried not to look at it, but it was everywhere now. In the cracks between panels, around the edges of doors, even on the ceiling where it dripped down in slow, sticky strands. "We need to get to engineering," Ethan said. "If the core goes offline, we're dead." Karish gave a single nod. They turned a corner and stopped. The hallway ahead was blocked by a tangle of cables and metal. It wasn't part of the ship's design. The cables were twisted together like veins, black slime seeping between them. Some of the cables were beating. Slow, steady pulses like a weak heartbeat. "This is biological," Karish said softly. Ethan's stomach turned. "No way. This is a ship, not a body." "Look closer." Ethan didn't want to, but he did. Among the cables were fingers, human fingers, half dissolved into the metal. Flesh fused with machine, like someone had been pulled into the walls. Ethan stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. What the hell is happening here? Karish stepped forward, completely calm, and reached out one silver hand toward the cables. "Don't touch it," Ethan hissed. Karish didn't answer. His fingers hovered just above the slimy surface. The cables reacted, pulling slightly away from his touch, almost like they were afraid of him. "They are aware," Karish said. Ethan wiped his mouth. "You keep saying that. Aware how? Like I aware?" "No," Karish said. "Like alive." Ethan shook his head. "That's impossible." But the evidence was right in front of him. The ship wasn't just failing, it was evolving. The two engineers had no choice but to work together. They couldn't go back. The hallway behind them was also slowly filling with black slime, dripping from the ceiling in long, thin strands. "Can you cut through it?" Ethan asked. Karish's upper hands pulled out a tool Ethan had never seen before, a thin silver cutter, pulsing with blue light. Karish ran it along the edge of the cables, and the slime screamed. Ethan jumped back, heart pounding. What was that? "The ship feels pain," Karish said. "Ships don't feel pain. This one does." The slime recoiled, pulling away from the cutter's light. Karish slowly cut a path through the cables, but the process was slow. Every inch they cleared, the slime tried to crawl back. Ethan worked beside him, using a human plasma torch, burning away sections of slime. The slime hissed under the heat, the sound high and thin, almost like a distant scream. "Why is it afraid of your cutter?" Ethan asked, sweat running down his back. "The cutter uses Vaseline energy," Karish said. "My species does not belong here." "What does that mean?" Karish hesitated, just for a second, then said, "This ship is not just human. Something else lives here now." They reached the secondary engineering room, a small backup control center near the rear of the ship. The door was stuck halfway open, slime pulsing along the edges. Ethan squeezed through first, Karish's larger frame following after. The room was dark. Only the soft blue light from Karish's cutter lit the space. The consoles were covered in slime, thin tendrils reaching into the screens, typing commands by themselves. Ethan stared at the screen. Human code, Vaseline code, and something else. Something wrong. "It's writing new systems," Ethan said, voice shaking. "It's rewriting the whole ship." Karish's yellow eyes narrowed. "It is becoming something new." They worked together, side by side. Two engineers who didn't trust each other, didn't even understand each other, but had no choice. Karish's alien tools cut through the slime faster than human tech could, while Ethan used his deep knowledge of human systems to reroute power and lock down key areas of the ship. But every time they cleared a section, the slime came back faster, adapting, learning, changing. "It's watching us," Ethan whispered. "It's learning from us." "Yes," Karish said. "It wants to understand." "Understand what?" Karish turned toward him, all four hands holding different tools. "Us. It wants to understand how we work, how we survive, how we think." Ethan shivered. "It's using the ship to study us." "Yes." The console flickered, and a message appeared in red text again. "Human. Vaseline. Different. Same." Ethan swallowed hard. "What does it want?" Karish tilted his head. "To know what happens when two enemies must trust each other." The room's lights flickered again, this time turning blood red. A low humming filled the air, vibrating through the floor. The screen flickered one more time, showing a new message. "We will watch you." The door slammed shut behind them. They were trapped. Ethan and Karish stood together, backs to the wall, staring at the living, pulsing walls of the room. For the first time, Ethan realized this wasn't just a ship with a problem. This was an experiment. And they were the test subjects. Two species, human and alien, forced to work together. Not by command, not by orders, but by something greater. Something that lived inside the ship itself. In the dim red light, Ethan looked at Karish, alien, strange, unreadable, and realized they were the only chance each other had. The ship was learning, but so were they. Ghost in the machine. The red light flickered softly in the small engineering room, casting strange shadows across the walls. The slime was gone, for now, but Ethan could still feel something watching him. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing against his skin. Karish stood near the terminal, all four hands working in perfect rhythm. His silver skin reflected the red light, making him look even more alien, like a statue carved from liquid metal. Ethan sat at the backup console, fingers tapping nervously on the worn keyboard. Neither of them spoke, because speaking felt dangerous now. The ship was no longer just a machine. It was a living, thinking thing, and it was listening. Ethan's stomach growled loudly, breaking the silence. Karish turned his head slightly. "You need food." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, well, I don't trust the food system right now. What if it's covered in slime too?" Karish's breathing slits widened slightly, a Vaseline sign of agreement. "We should check the mess hall," Karish said. "If systems fail there, others could die." Ethan didn't want to leave the room. It felt safer inside these small walls, with Karish and his alien tools nearby. But hiding wouldn't help. "Okay," Ethan said. "Let's move." The hallways were worse now. The slime had spread across the ceiling in thin, vein-like lines, pulsing faintly like it was breathing. Some of the walls bulged outward, as if something was pushing from the inside. The air smelled faintly of burned metal, and something sweeter, something like rotting fruit. Karish walked calmly, his upper arms holding his cutting tool ready, his lower arms holding a small scanner. Ethan followed close behind, his flashlight flickering in his shaky hand. They passed a crew bunkroom, the door half open. Inside, empty beds were covered in a thin layer of slime, pillows and blankets tossed aside. One crew uniform lay on the floor, the sleeves torn, but no body inside. Ethan stepped back. "Where is everyone?" Karish's scanner flickered with strange symbols, none of them readable. "They are here," Karish said. "Somewhere." When they reached the mess hall, the doors slid open without resistance, like the ship was inviting them inside. The room was empty, long metal tables perfectly clean. The food dispensers hummed softly, but the screens above them showed only static. Ethan stepped closer to the nearest table. A single tray sat in the middle, untouched. On the tray was a meal, human ration bars, and a Vaseline nutrient orb side by side. "That's weird," Ethan muttered. Karish scanned the tray. No contamination. Ethan sat down slowly, picking up the ration bar. It was dry and crumbly. Normal. But the moment he bit into it, his mouth filled with a faint metallic taste. He spat it out. "Tastes like the air in engineering." Karish said nothing, just watched him carefully. His species could survive longer without food, but Ethan was already tired, weak, and hungry. The walls around them shifted slightly, just a ripple, but both of them saw it. Ethan stood quickly. "We need to keep moving." They headed toward main engineering, where the ship's core was located. If they could reach the core, maybe they could cut off whatever was controlling the systems. As they walked, Ethan noticed something strange. The hallways were changing. Doors were missing. Some sections were longer than before. They passed the same junction twice, even though they were walking in a straight line. "We're being led somewhere," Ethan said. Karish's upper hands gripped his cutter tighter. "Yes." The floor beneath them vibrated softly, like a distant heartbeat. "Do Vaseline ships ever act like this?" Ethan asked. Karish's yellow eyes turned to him. "No, this is not a Vaseline mind. This is something new." They reached main engineering at last, but the door was already open. Inside, the lights flickered, half of them broken, the others glowing too bright. The core itself, a massive column of human and Vasarine technology fused together, pulsed faintly, black slime creeping across its surface like roots growing into living wood. Ethan stepped inside slowly. Karish followed. The room felt wrong, not just because of the slime, not just because of the flickering lights. There was something in the air, something that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Do you feel that?" Ethan whispered. Karish stood perfectly still, eyes closed, all four hands relaxed. He was listening. Then Karish opened his eyes. "There is a voice." Ethan's heart pounded. A voice. Karish stepped closer to the core, placing one hand against the slimy metal surface. The slime twitched at his touch but didn't pull away. "It speaks," Karish said, "but not in words." Ethan stepped beside him. "What does it want?" Karish's breathing slowed. "It wants to know us." Ethan swallowed hard. "Why?" Karish's yellow eyes met Ethan's. "Because it is becoming like us." The lights flickered again, and suddenly, the screens in main engineering all lit up at once. On every screen was Ethan's face, recorded from different angles, different moments. Ethan fixing a console. Ethan eating. Ethan sleeping. The ship had been watching him the entire time. Ethan stumbled back. "What the hell?" Another image appeared. This time, Karish. His silver body standing still in their room, his head tilted to the side, his hands twitching softly as if dreaming. The ship had been watching them both. On the main screen, a message appeared, flickering between English and Vasarine script. "You are not alone. You are us." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "What does that mean?" Karish stepped back from the core. "It is learning from us." The walls around the core shifted slightly, small humanoid shapes pressing against the slime from inside, as if half-formed bodies were trapped within. "Is it copying us?" Ethan asked. Karish's breathing slits flared. "Not copying. Becoming." The lights went out, plunging them into total darkness. A new voice, soft, whispering, and impossible to place, filled the room. "Teach us how to survive." Ethan's flashlight flickered on, but the beam barely cut through the thickening darkness. Beside him, Karish stood completely still, his upper hands reaching for Ethan's shoulder. For the first time, the alien's fingers trembled. "We are the teachers now," Karish said softly. "And the ship is the student." The whispering grew louder. The ship was awake, and it was hungry to learn. The living ship. The whispering did not stop. It followed Ethan and Karish out of main engineering, through the dark hallways, and even inside their minds. Soft, broken voices. Some sounded human, others Vasarine, but most were something new. A voice made from wires, metal, and hunger. Ethan pressed his hands over his ears. It didn't help. The voices were not coming from the air. They were coming from the walls, from the floor, from the ship itself. "Does your species hear this?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. Karish walked beside him, four hands moving in slow, controlled patterns, the Vasarine way of calming themselves in times of danger. "We hear it," Karish said, "but not with ears." Ethan glanced at him. "What does that mean?" Karish's glowing yellow eyes turned to him. Vasarine sense vibration, thought, and intent. This ship is not just speaking. It is feeling. Ethan swallowed hard. Feeling what? Karish's voice was calm, but the words were sharp. Us. The ship had changed. The walls no longer looked like metal. They breathed, expanding and shrinking like lungs too large for the ship's frame. The slime was no longer just a thin coating. It was part of the structure now, running along the floors and ceiling like veins carrying blood. Sometimes the slime pulsed faster when Ethan and Karish passed, like it was reacting to their presence. Sometimes it shrank back, as if the ship itself was afraid. It was learning. But it was also feeling. "What does it want from us?" Ethan asked again as they walked toward the central data hub. the only place they could possibly regain some control. Karish didn't answer right away. His breathing slits flared wider, the Vaseline sign of deep concentration. "It wants to understand conflict," Karish finally said. Ethan frowned. "Conflict." Karish turned his head slightly. The ship was made by humans and Vaseline, species that were enemies, then allies. It watches how we fight, how we trust, how we survive. Ethan's mind raced. It's learning from us. Yes. The lights flickered above them, no longer white, but a soft, pulsing red, like the glow inside living flesh. "Learning for what?" Ethan asked. Karish stopped walking. "To become something stronger than both." The central data hub was locked when they arrived. The doors fused shut with a thick layer of black slime. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Can you cut through it?" he asked Karish. Karish held up his silver cutter. The light flickered weakly. "The ship adapts. My tool will work slower now." Ethan didn't like that answer. The ship wasn't just learning about them. It was learning how to resist them. Karish began cutting, the slime screaming softly as the blade sliced through. Ethan stood guard, flashlight sweeping the hallway behind them. The whispering returned, closer now. This time, the voices were clearer. They said his name. "Ethan. Grant." Ethan froze. The light shook in his hand. "Did you hear that?" Karish didn't stop cutting, but his upper eyes blinked. "Yes." The voices whispered again, this time in Vaseline language. Karish's hands trembled slightly, but he didn't stop working. "What did it say?" Ethan asked. Karish's voice was low. "It spoke of my first war, the first time I saw a human ship." Ethan felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. "It's in our memories." Karish gave a slow nod. "It does not just watch us, it reaches into us." The door finally opened, slime peeling back like rotting skin. The data hub inside was only half lit, the screens flickering with strange patterns. Not quite human, not quite Vaseline. Both engineers stepped inside cautiously. The main data console was alive with activity, lines of code writing themselves, some in English, some in Vaseline script, but most in a new language, symbols neither of them recognized. "It's building something," Ethan whispered. Karish's lower hands worked at the console, while his upper hands held his cutter, ready for any threat. "Not building. Becoming." Ethan scanned the flowing data, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just rewriting systems. It was rewriting itself, combining human logic with Vaseline precision, creating a mind that could think like both species at once. But the ship's goal wasn't survival. It was evolution. "It's becoming a new life form," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "One that understands war, trust, fear, all of it." Karish's fingers paused for a moment. "It watches how we work together, how we argue, how we think." Ethan stepped back from the console. "It's using us as a model." The whispering grew louder, not just whispers now, but laughter. Strange, broken laughter, made from Ethan's own voice, mixed with Karish's metallic tones. It was mimicking them, and enjoying it. The screen flickered, and a new message appeared. "Conflict creates strength. Trust creates weakness. Which will you choose?" Ethan's heart pounded. "It's testing us." Karish's hands curled into fists. "It wants to see if we destroy each other, or become something stronger." The slime around the room shuddered, twitching like muscle spasms. Shapes pushed against the walls. Half-formed faces, human and Vaseline. Mouths open in silent screams. It had absorbed the crew. "It's learning from everyone," Ethan whispered. "Not just us." Karish stepped back from the console. "It will not stop." Ethan took a deep breath. "We have to fight back." Karish's yellow eyes narrowed slightly. "How?" Ethan's hands curled into fists. "We stop following the rules. We stop being predictable." Karish's breathing slits opened wide. The Vasarine version of surprise. Chaos, Karish said softly. Ethan grinned darkly. Human specialty. Together, they began flooding the system with nonsense. Random commands, contradictory signals, fake distress calls. They spoke to each other in half-sentences, sometimes in English, sometimes in Vasarine, sometimes both at once. The ship trembled, struggling to understand. The slime writhed across the floor and walls, confused by the lack of pattern. It couldn't learn what it couldn't predict. "We confuse it to death," Ethan said. Karish, for the first time, gave a small smile. "An unusual plan." "Welcome to human engineering," Ethan said. The lights flickered wildly, the whispering turning into screams, not of pain, but of frustration. The ship was smart, but not smart enough for human madness. The room shook violently, the slime recoiling back into the walls, leaving trails of burnt residue behind. The screens went dark, the whispering cut off mid-sentence. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. "Round one. Us." Karish stood beside him, calm but alert. "It will adapt again." Ethan nodded grimly. "So will we." The ship had learned much, but so had they. And the battle for control had only just begun. Betrayal or survival. The victory was short-lived. Ethan and Karish stood in the silence of the data hub, the screens dark. The slime burned back into the walls. But the silence felt wrong, not peaceful, but watching, like a predator waiting in the dark. "We stopped it," Ethan said softly, but even he didn't believe his own words. Karish didn't reply. His upper hands held his cutter, but his lower hands twitched, a sign of Vasarine unease. The ship had learned their trick. Next time, it wouldn't fall for it. "We need a new plan," Ethan muttered. Before Karish could answer, the door slammed shut, sealing them inside the data hub. The lights dimmed to a faint red glow, and the walls around them began to move. Not the slime. The metal itself. It rippled like liquid, slow waves rolling across the surface, changing the shape of the room, making it smaller. "It's isolating us," Karish said calmly, though his breathing slits flared wide. Vasarine fear response. Ethan pounded the door with his fist. "We already beat you. What do you want now?" The whispering returned. This time, it was one voice, speaking directly into Ethan's mind. Soft. Familiar. It was his own voice. "Karish is lying to you." Ethan froze. The voice was smooth, calm, persuasive. It spoke with his own tone, using his own doubts. "He knew about this before you came on board." Ethan's stomach twisted. "That's not true," he whispered. Karish turned slightly. "What?" Ethan didn't answer. The ship was talking only to him. He was on the first Vasarine scout team to study these ships. He knew they were alive. He knew this would happen. "That's a lie," Ethan whispered again, louder this time. Karish stepped closer. "What is a lie?" Ethan's fists clenched. His pulse pounded in his ears. "Nothing." The whispering didn't stop. "He's using you." On the other side of the room, Karish's upper eyes blinked slowly. His own whisper filled his mind. Not Ethan's voice, but the voice of his first commander, the Vasarine officer who once called all humans liars and killers. "The human will betray you the first chance he gets." Karish's breathing slowed. He knew it wasn't real. He knew the ship was manipulating them. But the whispers were so familiar. "He will blame you for this." Karish's upper hands tightened around his cutter. "He will kill you to save himself." Karish turned his head slightly, all four eyes focusing on Ethan. Human, unpredictable, dangerous. The room shrunk again, the walls pressing closer. The slime on the floor thickened, forming a ring around both of them, separating human and Vasarine by a narrow gap. The whispering continued in both their minds. "Only one of you leaves this room alive." Ethan took a step back. Karish didn't move. The air between them filled with unspoken tension, fear, suspicion, The weight of species history. Humans and Vasarine had fought wars, betrayed treaties, and only recently pretended to trust each other. The ship knew this. The ship used this. We can't fall for this, Ethan said, his voice tight. It wants us to turn on each other. Karish's yellow eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. I know. But neither lowered their weapons. The walls pressed closer. The slime crept higher. The air grew colder. The ship wasn't going to let them think. It was going to push them until they snapped. The whispers changed, becoming memories, real ones, pulled from both their minds. For Ethan, it was the sound of a Vasarine warship bombing his colony, his mother's scream, his father pulling him into a shelter while the sky burned red. For Karish, it was the first time he saw a human boarding party, their faces covered in black helmets, weapons firing, leaving half his crewmates dead in the first 30 seconds. The ship played both memories at once, overlapping, blending, until neither of them could tell whose fear was whose. Ethan's hands shook. Karish's breathing slits fluttered unevenly. It's just the ship, Ethan said, trying to convince himself. It's not real. Karish's upper hands flexed. It is real to us. The slime between them shifted, forming a narrow black blade, smooth and sharp. It rose from the floor, floating between them like an offering. A weapon. One weapon. Do you see it? Ethan asked. Yes, Karish said. Neither reached for it. The whispering returned, both voices speaking at once. The other one will kill you. Strike first. Survive. The blade hung in the air. Ethan's mind screamed at him. He's an alien. You can't trust him. He's too fast, too strong. You have to strike first. Karish's instincts screamed at him. Humans lie. Humans betray. Humans kill to survive. Neither moved. The ship wanted a fight. But both of them knew, if they fought, the ship won. Ethan dropped his flashlight. The clatter echoed in the small room. Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands, empty hands, in front of him. We beat it before, Ethan said. We beat it together. Karish's upper hands held the cutter steady. It will adapt again, Karish said. We will too, Ethan replied. The slime pulsed, the blade trembling in the air, waiting for someone to grab it. But neither of them did. Karish lowered his cutter. The whispers screamed in both their heads, angry, frustrated. The walls trembled violently, shaking so hard Ethan had to brace himself against the floor. The slime blade melted, turning into harmless liquid that pooled at their feet. The ship had lost this round. The walls stopped moving. The air warmed slightly. The door unlocked with a loud clunk. They had passed the test. Karish stared at Ethan for a long moment. You resisted. Ethan gave a shaky smile. So did you. The Vasarine's upper eyes blinked in slow approval. We are not enemies. Ethan nodded. Not anymore. They stepped out into the hallway, human and alien, side by side, walking into whatever came next. The ship wasn't done. It would test them again. It would evolve again. But so would they. Together. Human ingenuity vis alien logic. The hallway stretched before them, quiet but far from empty. Thin streams of black slime ran along the walls and floor, no longer hiding, no longer shy. The ship was awake, fully awake. And it knew them now. It knew their steps, their words, their fears. It had tested their trust, their instincts, their species-old hatred, and they had resisted, for now. But Ethan knew something the ship didn't. Humans cheat. He walked beside Karish, both of them silent, both listening to the quiet hum of the living walls. The silence was not empty. It was waiting, like a predator preparing its next move. We cannot fight it directly, Karish said, his voice low. Ethan smirked, though there was no humor in his eyes. Who said anything about fighting fair? They reached the central communication hub, the only place left where they could possibly send a message to the outside fleet. If they could warn command, maybe, just maybe, They could destroy the ship before it could spread. But the door was sealed, fused shut with layers of metal and something else. Not slime this time, but a smooth, living surface, like skin stretched too thin. It breathed. Karish held up his cutter. Ethan stopped him. Not yet. The human engineer knelt beside the wall, pulling out a small human multi-tool from his belt. Old, scratched, and half-broken from years of use. With a flick, a small laser popped out. "What are you doing?" Karish asked. "Making noise," Ethan said, grinning. He started cutting. Not the door itself, but the nearby wall. The laser scratched into the metal, carving out random words, symbols, meaningless junk. "Why?" Karish asked again. "Because it's watching," Ethan said. "It wants to learn, right? It wants to understand us." Karish's upper hands twitched in confusion. "You are feeding it false data." Ethan winked. "Now you're getting it." The ship was smart. It could adapt. It could learn. But it couldn't handle chaos, especially the kind only a human mind could produce. Ethan scratched a joke into the metal. Why did the engine refuse to start? Because it lost its spark. He moved further down and scratched nonsense equations, mixing human math with symbols he barely remembered from Karish's Basarine tools. He carved out a fake distress signal, a location that didn't exist. Karish watched, then slowly he joined him. The Vasarine engineer used his own cutter to etch random Vasarine proverbs into the floor, phrases with no clear meaning, stories from his homeworld, even the lyrics to an old Vasarine morning song. The walls shivered. The slime pulsed, confused. The ship was trying to process everything at once, and failing. The door trembled, the living skin shrinking back slightly. It was distracted. "Now we cut," Ethan said. Karish's cutter flared bright, slicing through the weakened skin, the slime too confused to seal itself back up. Ethan pried open the door with his bare hands, muscles shaking from the effort. Inside the comms hub, it was worse than they expected. The entire room was covered in slime and black cables, all of it pulsing in sync with the ship's heartbeat. Screens flickered, some showing human faces, some Vasarine, some half-formed shapes made from both species mixed together. It was trying to create something new. "It is blending us," Karish said softly. "A new species." Ethan stared at the screens, feeling bile rise in his throat. "It wants to become the perfect life form. Part human, part Vasarine." Karish shook his head. "Not just that. It wants to understand why we fight, why we trust, why we survive." Ethan swallowed. "And what happens if it figures that out?" Karish's yellow eyes met his. "It will not need us anymore." The meaning was clear. Once the ship learned everything, it would erase the originals. Them. There was no time to waste. Ethan ran to the primary console, Karish covering him with all four hands gripping his cutter and scanner. The console was alive, parts of it shifting, rewriting itself faster than Ethan could follow. He had never seen a system so aware, constantly watching, constantly adapting. He tapped furiously at the screen, trying to override the controls, but the system rejected every command, not with an error message, but with a simple response. "Why? Why what?" Ethan shouted. The screen flickered again. "Why do you fight?" Ethan's breath caught. The ship wasn't asking how to survive. It was asking why survival even mattered. Ethan's fingers froze over the keys. Karish's voice came softly beside him. "Tell it." Ethan turned. "What?" Karish stepped closer. "It is young. It is learning. It asks because it does not understand." The human and the Vasarine stood together, facing the screen, facing the ship itself. Ethan took a deep breath. "Because," he began, struggling to find the words, "because we want to live, not just to breathe, not just to exist." The screen flickered, asking again, "Why?" Karish's metallic voice joined Ethan's. "To build, to discover, To understand what is beyond the next star. Ethan nodded. To laugh. To cry. To lose and still keep going. The screen flickered faster. Conflict is survival. No, Ethan said firmly. Conflict is part of life. But survival, real survival, is more than fighting. Karish raised his cutter, holding it high, but not to attack, to show trust. Survival is working together, Karish said, even when we do not understand each other. Ethan smiled, placing his hand on Karish's upper arm, even when we're scared. The screen pulsed. The slime around the room slowed, unsure. The ship did not understand, but it was listening. Ethan's fingers moved one last time, entering a final command, one the ship did not expect. A story from Earth, a Vasarine myth, a mix of nonsense, humor, hope, and fear, a tale with no ending. The ship froze. The slime recoiled. The living metal walls shuddered, unable to process something with no pattern, no logic, no purpose. We gave it everything, Ethan whispered. Everything except a clear answer. Karish's upper eyes blinked slowly. That is the answer. The walls rippled violently, the slime peeling back, the screens going dark. The ship had a choice, to erase them and learn nothing, or to let them go and keep learning. The door slid open. The ship chose to let them go. As they walked back toward their room, the room they once argued over, the room they now shared without question, Ethan smiled at Karish. We make a good team. Karish's breathing slits fluttered softly. The Vasarine version of a laugh. Human chaos. Vasarine logic. Ethan grinned. Perfect. The ship was still watching. But it was not their enemy anymore. It was their student. And the lessons had only just begun.